The Blue Angels, the squad's aerial maneuvers, the thrill, the young and the old alike.
Flying Blue Angel number 1, the commanding officer and flight leader of the Blue Angels from League City, Texas, Captain Eric Doyle.
When I was told I was boss, that moment, that feeling, I'll never forget that. Every day I get to put on this blue suit and fly that beautiful jet back there. I'm thankful and humbled to represent the 800,000 men and women in the Navy and Marine Corps. I'm a Blue Angel fan. I've always been one and I remain one. I just had the distinct opportunity to be one for a few years. It's an amazing organization. I wanted to fly since I knew what flying was. I grew up in the Air Force for all intents and purposes. I grew up with an Air Force dad, flew fighters, flew F-4s in Vietnam, flew everything you could think of from a fighter perspective in the Air Force. And I wanted to fly Air Force jets. I wanted to fly F-4s. That was my dream, was to fly Phantoms. I went to college here at Texas A&M University in Texas and got a degree in engineering. But the whole time I planned on going to the Air Force and flying, at least trying to fly fighters. And when I applied to the Air Force to go to officer training school, in my officer interview with the Air Force, the officer recommended that I apply to the Marine Corps. He said, you should apply to the Marines because most of our slots are going to be taken. It was a pretty adversarial conversation. And after that, I went home and talked to my dad about it. And I was really put out because I didn't want to do anything but the Air Force. I wanted to be an Air Force pilot. And he said to me, well, if you want to fly, maybe you should consider it. I did all my Air Force stuff through the recruiting office at the mall in College Station. On the other side of the mall is the Navy office. And so I ran an Air Force application and a Navy application in parallel. And the crazy thing is I ended up getting an Air Force slot and a Navy slot. And that's a pretty interesting divine intervention story of ending up going Navy. I can't really tell you sometimes exactly why, but it was certainly the right path. So I got in the Navy. I went to officer candidate school in Pensacola, Florida, picked up F-18s West, as it was at the time, and went to Lemoore, California, and flew Lot 10 F-18 Charlies with VFA 115. Did a cruise with them, and then after that cruise, we transitioned to the Super Hornet. So we were the first operational Super Hornet squadron flying F-18Es off the Abraham Lincoln. And our sister squadron was VFA 25. And at the time, we didn't have any Top Gun graduates, whether it be instructors or students that had ever been to Top Gun in our squadron. But VFA 25, who was right next door in Ready Room number 2 on the Lincoln, had a ton of Top Gun talent. And whether it be in a brief, whether it be in a lecture, in a flight, there was something unique and different about those guys and the way they operated. They exuded confidence and intelligence, and they knew their craft. That's what I wanted, and that's why that became my next dream. My next goal was to be that. And that's where I strove to go to Top Gun, because I just wanted to be the best I could be at being a pilot, being an F-18 pilot. And so I flew at Top Gun for a few years. And from there, I did a few more squadrons flying F-18s. I did an Air Force exchange where I got to fly F-22 Raptors at Nellis. And then did my command tour in Lemoore, California with VFA 113, which is a pretty neat experience because the founding father, if you will, of the Blue Angels started at did his command tour at VFA 113, then ended up continuing to fly the Hornet with Blues, which was pretty awesome. If you rewind all the way to 1983, my first air show to watch the Blue Angels, that was always in the back of my mind. That or the Thunderbirds, really. That's what you're after, flying planes like that, flying like that, to be that person on the other side of the fence line. The Blue Angels have always been in the back of my mind, and being boss has always been, maybe admittedly, more towards the front of my mind. So I put an application together, and submitted towards the end of my command tour. The culmination of the finalist interview week is at the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola on the base. I was, I think, the second interview on that morning. So I didn't sleep very well. I was nervous, of course, and got up really early and made sure everything was perfect with my uniform and went over early to the museum. Well, as I walked around the museum, I noticed that my shoe was giving out. The heel of my Bates brown leather shoes was starting to disintegrate. And it's making a big mess in the museum, and my shoes are a disaster. And this feels to me like the worst thing that's ever happened to me, because I am about to go into an interview to be for the boss of the Blue Angels. Jeff Dermody, a good friend of mine, comes out. He was #1 interview, so came out and saw me, and he sees the look on my face, and he's like, well, we can fix this, take mine. We're sitting there on the ready room chairs. I'm taking my shoes off. He's taking his shoes off. Meanwhile, he's a good friend, but also competing with him, you know, for the position. Boss Frosch comes out to run to the bathroom, and he looks down at us like, what are you guys doing? And made for a great story for the interview. It was analogous to my life, my career, that there's always somebody there that's helping you out. It's not just you, whether it be family, friends. There were a lot of people that helped get me to where I was and to be in a position to apply to be the boss. And down to the last second, someone was helping me get dressed because my shoes were a mess. When you watch the Blues, whether you be civilian, military, pilot, you see this amazing performance. And you see the interaction, not just in the air, but on the ground, and the way all Blue Angels, all 140 to 150 of them, interact with the public, they interact with the kids, they interact with retirees. Truly an astoundingly professional organization. But what you don't see is what happens behind the scenes. How is that created? How is that made? How do they do that? One of the more significant events in that training process is when a new boss comes in, because you're clearly not just the flight leader, you're the commanding officer. So there's a lot of things that come with being the CO, and there's clearly a lot that comes with being the flight leader of the Blues. And for every new boss, the one that's training you the most, that you spend the most time with, is #2, the right wingman. And for me, my first year, our #2, and I like to say my #2, was Damon Cruz. And I spent a lot of time with Damon. That was my training officer. That was my teacher. He's attached to my hip, literally in the air. He's the one on the right wing, seeing everything I do. He's the one that actually probably knows what I'm thinking before I do it, and hears the tone and tenor of my voice on the radio and how I'm doing, what I'm doing, knows it all. And it's a very special relationship, and it's one that has nothing to do with rank. I would say that he's probably about half of time in the Navy, time in the airplane, but none of that mattered there. That is how we built the demo and built trust. And winter training is challenging. There's a lot of new procedures, new maneuvers, new things you've got to remember to do, and what's the sequence of your practice. You know, it's hard. It's definitely hard. And I probably did 1,000 diamond rolls until I felt like I could get it around and not scare everybody from hitting the ground. But it was a really special experience. The Thunderbirds were having a little bit of maintenance trauma, and they weren't able to do their first show, which was Luke Air Force Base. We also had a little trauma with our first show because there were some airspace issues, and we weren't able to do it. So coincidentally, with the Thunderbirds problem, and then our problem with the first show site, the Thunderbirds offered for us to take Luke Air Force Base. And I'm fresh out. I'm still in winter training for all intents and purposes, still, you know, honing procedures, and they're not quite at brainstem level yet. And I remember walking out, the wind's gusting, It's hot, dust is blowing, people everywhere. It was definitely a very tense moment. Pretty quiet. I think everybody could probably tell that I'm very much in thought about the demo ahead. We did the walk down and I get in the jet and try not to look up at the crowd, and Bobby Fitzpatrick, my crew chief, gets up on the ladder, and it was in that time with Bobby where the nerves just washed away. It's like you hit play on all that training, all that time spent, all those interactions, sometimes 3 times a day in El Centro with Bobby on the Lex of the Hornet. He's your fan. He's there, he's your moral support, no matter what's going on. And he's, you know, the tap on the shoulder. It's amazing, those few minutes there with Bobby put it all right. You know, it's ready to fly. And there's so many things in that team that are there for a reason, whether you know it or not, or they just became that way by happenstance. Having that crew chief there with you, that was special. That's what got me going that day. There were a lot of special moments there in that time, but you know, the other thing is I'm first year boss, so you try to spend a lot of time relying on the procedures, because you learn a lot in naval aviation of human factors and distractions and things that can pull you away from the mission. And I knew going into the Houston show that it's a home show and there's going to be a lot of distractions and family, and you got to make sure the primary mission is first in your mind, which is flying a good and safe demonstration, and not getting too distracted or focused on other things, get other things in your brain in the cockpit. But again, on that walk down where I heard my name, and you know, I can see the crowd line out of the corner of my eye, I can probably see the piece of fence that I used to stand at, and hear my name in hometown. Boy, talking about human factors and being prepared to fly, you may need to take a minute. That's a really special moment, and everyone should get that chance, you know, the hometown show. We were on our way to Fargo, North Dakota. So on our way to Fargo, we did a sneak attack on the Oshkosh Air Show. We didn't even use a Blue Angel call sign on that transit to keep it as quiet as possible. We actually used Voris as our call sign that day. And we even stayed well outside of a large bubble from Oshkosh, so nobody could see us. And we're up at altitude. And when you're up high like that, you're not on the boom mic, but you're on your oxygen mask. And so we got gas, we topped off, and then we spiraled down towards Oshkosh, but again stayed away from it, and they kicked off the show with the national anthem. And in any place like Sun and Fun or Oshkosh, there are tons of airplanes for a fly-in, you know, and now we're gonna go poke our nose into all the little Cessnas out there flying around. So that's busy and stressful, and your smoke on, running across, you know, trying to hit the air show there. And we enter and we do a few maneuvers, and it wasn't until we were almost complete that I realized I still have the oxygen mask on. I didn't swap out where we normally take off the mask and put our boom mic on. And that was a really special experience. And just to be at Oshkosh, which is a center of aviation, and to do that flyby, that was a really neat experience. Some of the maneuvers that look good to the crowd may be the easier of the maneuver than some that are maybe benign, or at least look benign from the angle of bank. Maybe the hardest one in the jet. So the Diamond 360, where we showcase the pride and precision of the Blue Angels in our close formation. If you look at our picture from the end of the season, both years, our Diamond 360 is probably, maybe that far apart in places. That's hard to do, and to fly the way you do, that's a challenging maneuver. I think a lot of people think there's a lot of automation, or there's a lot of push the auto button and it flies the maneuver. It's all looking outside, and more than I had ever in flying the F-18, I spent most of the demo looking outside and cross-referencing the HUD for airspeed and altitude. But all the maneuvers I flew looking out the window and looking at the ground and watching everything translate across the sky, looking at checkpoints on the ground. Yeah, that's something that I'd say is not commonly understood in the way we fly. Those F-18s that we flew were the oldest in the Navy. Airplanes and machines get tired. I don't care who you are or where they come from, and they have gripes and they have broken wires, and there was a lot of work to keep those things flying. And it's amazing. I stopped worrying about it because the Mo at the end of the day would have had 2 jets are down, or we've got this hide problem, or servo problem, or engine problem. I stopped worrying because they were always ready the next day. They always found a way. Every man and woman on that team believes in the mission, and they will not stop until it's complete. In the Blue Angel experience, it's hard to believe you're there. It's hard to look down, and it wasn't a day that went by, and I really made this a goal to take a second, take a minute to observe what you're doing, and to be in that Blue Angel flight suit, to fly that airplane, to have all those amazing interactions is special and something that should not be taken lightly. And there isn't a day that goes by that you can't believe you're doing this thing. And it also is amazing that it happened so fast. And for me now, having done it, it's amazing that I got to do it, and it's just hard to believe how fast it happened. But most of anything that you're a part of that's special, it's the people. And the people that I had the pleasure and the opportunity, the honor to work with there, I will remember them to the day I die, and the people they are and the people they become as a part of that team, and how they uphold the traditions of the Blue Angels. It's really special.